in different periods of history. So when I thought I needed to play a more prominent role as leader of the opposition and as general secretary of the party, I did that. And that was a more public role to mobilize support, to galvanize the party, to speak about the vision of the PPP when it gets back into office, to help to prepare the manifesto, that is the plan of the government when it gets into government, and to strongly advocate for all of this, which I did. Now, once we had taken the reign of government, the president is tasked with implementing the plan of the party. So he has to be the lead player in the trust moving forward. And he needs to be given the space to do so, the public space at least. So to some extent, this was a deliberate approach of mine. I need to play a more supportive role at this point in time to ensure that the government delivers on its promises to the people and that it operates efficiently, transparently, which is what the party promised the people of this country. And that is what I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of work which I had been very comfortable with doing, say, as Minister of Finance, now backroom sort of work, to ensure that the plans of the government are ready to deliver on the promises.
Your portfolio is still rather wide. You oversight finance, energy, the environment. Which of those roles you'd say in particular you sought to latch on to really push forward?
Well, actually, all three of them, and they have to move in tandem with each other because they're all important sectors for the delivery of the vision that we outline to the people of this country. So finance definitely had to be dealt with because what we discovered, we had $419.5 billion spent by the last government without any parliamentary oversight, a massive debt, domestic debt that we had to address, and then an empty project pipeline. The public sector investment program had been exhausted. A lot of the projects that we had identified, prepared, and put in the pipeline for implementation, APNU implemented them, some in a fairly efficient manner and most inefficiently. However, the project pipeline had been depleted. And if you do not have new projects entering a project pipeline, then what will happen is that you run out of steam. The country will run out of steam, and we are in the real danger of that happening. And that is why you don't see it, but there has been a frantic effort on the part of the new government to not just identify projects, but accelerate the project of their preparation so we can start their implementation. Now, when will we see the real benefits of these projects? It's in year 2 or 3 because we're in the preparatory stage. And so finance had to be dealt with immediately. And then there were some very fundamental promises that we made that we thought were important to the economy and to the social sector that had to be delivered for immediately, but also catered for because we have had an impact on the revenue stream because of the pandemic. And these promises have been to give dynamism back and incentive back to the productive sector. So we had to immediately return the land leases back to status quo ante. We had to remove taxes that the miners were faced with, VAT on equipment, not just miners, but every productive sector. I'm not going to enumerate the list because we remove income taxes from the education sector, from healthcare. And then on the social side, we had to remove all of the taxes that we said were burdensome. The VAT on education, not on education, but on the electricity, on water, on a whole range of food items, etc. So we had to deal with finance immediately. Then on the environment side, we lost momentum. They went off on this adventure called the green state economy and forgot that we had a low carbon development strategy that was way ahead of its time, that had earned us $250 million. And had they only continued with that, the second phase, the natural progression of the low carbon development strategy, we would have seen a new agreement with maybe even more than $250 million. So we had to immediately strip out. I'm not going to tell you about the reforms in the sector, but we had to make some structural changes, but refocus on the sector that was earning us revenue. And I must say, through hard work of a few people, we have now been listed. Our forest carbon has been listed, and in a matter of months, we believe that the decisions would be made that could see upwards of $300 million approved for Guyana.
This is from Accelerated the NGO?
Yes, through the art program, the Architecture for REDD Plus transactions.
Okay.
So we have now been listed here, and we'd have carbon or forest carbon underwritten at about $10 per ton. The last agreement, it was $5 per ton we are getting from Norway. And there is an upside to it too. Should it be traded in the market at a higher price, we will benefit from that higher price beyond the $10 after they have deducted the admin costs. So we've had to move, and now we're on the cusp of getting about $300 million for Guyana in just a short period of time that APNU totally ignored. In fact, their green state strategy was more of a burden on the Treasury. Then we've had to restructure almost all of the other green initiatives to focus on the big challenges, both on adaptation and mitigation side. And we have done so, focusing on flood control, water management, drought management, on the adaptation side, because that's the biggest challenge to our country, and trying to align all of the tiny projects to bigger projects that will address these things. So new canals akin to the Hope Canal for Berbice, for Region 5, for Region 3, where we have major threats in the future from unusual rainfall patterns, as we've seen just recently. And then on renewable energies, there was no program, but a huge commitment to the Paris Club to do 100% renewable by 2025. So on that front, we've had to look at the array of projects there. Everything now is practically fossil fuel, but heavy bunker C, which is very polluting, and lined up about energy security in the future, which is one of our goals, energy security, but cheaper energy both for the domestic consumers and the business community. And we've laid out a plan and started working on the projects.
So you're sticking with that 2025 deadline?
No, we cannot get to 100% renewable by 2025.
Unrealistic.
It was unrealistic, totally unrealistic. They had no project to do such a thing. So our demand now is 250 megawatts from the gas to energy project, 160 from Amila, we have retendered the Amila, and about 30 to 50 from solar. And we're currently exploring wind power too. So we'd have an energy mix. Now, globally, although gas is still a polluting energy, they see it as a transitional energy from the very polluting bunker diesel to full renewable energy, because the global demand for power, for energy, will far outstrip the investments being made in renewable. And so you still have excess demand that can be satisfied from renewable energy. And therefore you have to have a transitional fuel. And gas is seen as a transitional fuel. Now, I've seen a lot of comments about the viability of these projects. And the program is very short. I shall not spend time going through that. But each of these projects are very, very viable. And what pains me a lot, Neil, is that people can just come and write an article and question the viability. They have not done any study. At Myla Falls, you've had over 4,000 pages of studies that were on environment, on the hydrology, on geotechnical risk, on design, on all of these issues. People can just ignore all of this technical work and then come and make a judgment call. And then it gains traction because it's a very important, it's a very sexy thing now to talk about renewable energy. I recall the same people who were talking about, oh, why not go for renewable? Why are we going for the gas to energy project? And I said at that time, when we come back to the renewable energy project, you're going to complain about it. And now they're complaining about the hydropower too. So the same people were complaining about the gas to energy project. So at some point in time, maybe again with editors, we can go through the viability of each of these projects and how studied they have been, and to show that we can, that they are justified. I saw a group of NGOs call on us to go to consultations on these projects. We've consulted ad nauseum on these projects. But a political party has to fulfill its promises. These same NGOs that talk about good governance and that people must listen to, must be accountable, political parties must be accountable, want us to move away from good governance and accountability. We are accountable to the electorate. And when we put a manifesto out that says we're going to build a Myla Fall, because we have studied it, we're going to go for a gas to energy project. We campaign on this. People give us the mandate to do this. We say we will do this to give you cheaper electricity. They then want us to go in an unaccountable way and deal with a few NGOs, some of which, like the GHRA, which this has no constituency, and then stop a project that we got the mandate from the people to do because they have concerns. So I do hope that the same people who are calling for accountable government realize that these projects went to the electorate, and the electorate gave us the mandate. And if they're not happy with it, please, at the end of 5 years, in a country that is free, they can change their government.
The reason Site Global pulled out in 2013 of the Myla Falls project was because it didn't feel that it had political backing all round. The PPP has 1 seat majority in Parliament, 2 if you count Schumann's support for the PPP, which he has done from time to time. How do you suppose you'll get over that hurdle?
I think the Site Global pulled out. This was a subsidiary of Blackstone, and I must say they were the project developers. They went out to tender. They had selected China Rail as the preferred contractor. Now, these companies had to, that company, it's a global company with a market cap bigger than our economy, maybe 50 times bigger than our entire economy. They will not do any project that is not feasible. So they had recognized that the project is feasible, and they were moving ahead with it. The Inter-American Development Bank was prepared to put in money into the project. They did their own studies. The only thing is APNU said politically that they can't go forward with the project. And they were trying to block the project because they had a majority in Parliament. And these big companies said, it's not worth it. we'll just walk away from it. But they killed a very important project for political reasons. And I realized when we were in opposition and having some conversations with them that most of them had not read the project. For example, they kept saying there would be $2 billion of debt to the Treasury. There was zero debt to the Treasury. The cost of power was 10 cents per kilowatt hour at that time. We were generating at 20 cents per kilowatt hour in that period. And so they had not read the project. We urged Norway to have another study, and Nordkonsult did a study based on what Trotman and the others had said, and they concluded that still this is the best project for Guyana. And Nordkonsult has the support of the Norwegian government, and they're one of the top consultancy firms in the world. So now we don't have that issue with a parliamentary minority to block the project. And had they gone ahead with that project, by 2017, they would have been the beneficiary. We would have had stable power, and we would have had cheaper power. Now, they're complaining now about blackouts, but you realize that in 5 years of APNU government, they never added any baseload power. Not any new major generating capacity. So they were utilizing all the old generating capacity that we had in place that would have been replaced by Amila, because Amila would have generated about 160 megawatts of power, and our peak demand in the interconnected grid now is about 130. So Amila would have replaced all of these old sets, and those sets would have gone into reserves. They did no major work on power generating, nor on the grid. And so the grid now is failing. So our new project is a smart grid we're working on now, plus nearly 450 to 500 megawatts of new power for the future.
So I do want to go back to the issue about the environment and climate change, as you mentioned. Next week, or a little bit more than that, you'll be speaking at the Houston Technology Conference. You'd be talking about Guyana being this new offshore energy country. In the context of net zero emissions, how are you going to rationalize the two?
Well, first of all, globally, the demand for fossil fuel will either remain stable or increase because enough is not being done on the demand side. So after the recovery from the pandemic, people thought we had reached peak oil. And therefore, you have to now demand for fossil fuel will start declining. But demand has picked up again. And as I said earlier, enough is not being done on the demand side. I saw 2 days ago, President Biden said that by 2030, they want to have 50% of the vehicles using renewable energy, maybe, but that's simply not enough globally. So as I said before, if demand outstrips the investment in renewable energy, then you're going to have the fossil fuels still in play. And that is why countries are still building coal-fired power plants like China, etc., because there's not enough renewable energy to supply it. Now, in that context, even in the context of stagnating or peak oil, where we have reached a maximum demand for oil now, and it starts declining, Guyana is in a unique position where it can replace or supplement, but say replace the existing producers of fossil fuel, because fossil fuel would have to be produced. We'd still need oil for cars and for our power plants in the foreseeable future. Why is it that Guyana can replace those countries? Because of our lower production costs. So we are way below like $25, $30 within that range. And secondly, we produce sweet light crude oil, unlike Venezuela, which is heavy crude oil, sour crude oil. which has less sulfur and less polluting. So in that future, the foreseeable future, Guyana can still be a major producer without changing the global dynamics. So some people talk about, oh, Exxon is going to emit maybe, say, 100 million tons of fossil fuel here, without recognizing, not fossil fuel emissions, but recognizing that a ton of emission emitted anywhere in the world has the same impact on the climate as a ton of emission in Guyana. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, we can't have a great policy domestically and the rest of the world continues to burn fossil fuel, etc. It's going to have the same impact on climate change. It has to be a global movement forward. So I want to show that in Guyana's case, that in spite of us emerging as a producer, a major producer of fossil fuel, that our contribution to the world is still a positive one because we are already at net zero emission, given the enormous forest that we have that has been a carbon sink. And I want to show with figures how much forest how much carbon emissions or greenhouse gases our forests sequester versus how much total emissions are from Guyana. And when you look at the balance sheet, you will see we still remain positive that we are a net sequester of greenhouse gases globally than almost most of the countries in the world. And where they're aiming for to get in 2050, we're already there. So that is the context in which I will present my presentation.
I want to go back to what you were saying about preparing all of these projects and so on. The criticism has been that the government has been ignoring stuff like feasibility studies and so on. How do you respond to those?
That is unfair. The fact that many people don't know about the feasibility studies, although we have said they exist, because they don't read doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I recall some very prominent gentlemen saying that the Marriott, there was no feasibility study for Marriott, the project. Yet we had published the feasibility studies. We can publish the feasibility studies for Myla. And Mr. Anand Prasad from Starbuck News asked me when we met with the editors, how is it that the PPP was so critical of APNU and are still using some of the studies done in that period, right, to justify the gas to energy project? And it's a fair question. What I pointed out to him is that one is that those studies were not done by APNU. They were done by the Japanese government. They were done by the Inter-American Development Bank, etc. And they all pointed out that this is a feasible project. We on our own examine some basic numbers. And the basic numbers are, if you're generating using bunker C at 14 cents per kilowatt hour now, and we can bring in the pipeline and the gas, we can build the pipeline, bring in the gas, build the power plant, and pay back for those, and still generate power at 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour, then we are saving 50% of the generating costs. We're using gas, and gas is less polluting. So those are the numbers done by ExxonMobil, by us, and by everyone. And those are numbers substantiated globally, if you look at global numbers. Therefore, it's a no-brainer. When I use the word no-brainer, I didn't mean that people didn't have brain. But if you look at the numbers, then any sane person will make that judgment immediately. But you had to do the studies, the environmental studies, the geotechnical, the geophysical, which are being done now to ensure that the project is designed properly with minimal impact on the environment. So that is what I said, even in opposition, it's not the studies that were the matter. We did that work and we knew we were going to go with this project. That's why we put it in our manifesto. So it's not using old studies or not doing feasibility studies. These projects have been studied over and over and over again. Qatar is doing it, every country is doing it. But we have a kind of situation in Guyana where this is not a new thing. It's almost a pattern. The Hope Canal, when I started that project, the GHRA, the Human Rights Organization, called for us not to build the project. You had a group of engineers got together and said it wouldn't work. The gradient was not steep enough to have the water flow out. There are big problems with it. The opposition said at that time that we were doing it as a political project. Well, we built the Hope Canal and it saved Region 4 and Georgetown in the last season. Because when the Conservancy Dam was threatened, we didn't have to release the water into the Mahaika River, which would immediately flood the Region 5 right across to the Abari, or have water overtop into the Region 4. We release the water indirectly into the sea. And we suffered the same thing for the Berbice Bridge. We suffered the same kind of nitpicking for the Marriott Hotel. So we live in a free society. We live in a free country, and we encourage public participation in debate on big projects. But the debates must take place on technical issues. A person who doesn't have a modicum of interest or even knowledge about a particular sector, technical knowledge, can get up one day and challenge the engineer and say, oh, this is not good. And then he gets traction. And suddenly a petition comes about, oh, stop the project. We have a commitment to people of this country. The small people who cannot, Neil, pay their electricity bill. When we campaign, you go around this country. The electricity bill is too high. We have to solve that. We promised to get electricity prices down by half before we contest the next elections. We have to do it. Those are the people that matter. And, at the end of the period, the same people who don't want the project will criticize us for that not happening. Those are the people we're working for. And so the fact that we talk about the big projects, sometimes we don't talk enough about the beneficiaries, the ordinary people whose lives can be transformed, that can lower cost of living. We're already struggling with the high cost of living because of the pandemic. The imported inflation, freight going up, goods prices going up, and we import the inflation. We're already struggling with that, and we're hoping that over time, once you get past the pandemic, that would be normalized. We're struggling now with a very, very difficult period. We're trying to reboot the economy after it has been flattened by APNU with no proper policy measures and bad policies. We're trying to reboot it in the context and in the middle of a global pandemic. That's enormously difficult to do so. Yet we have had some successes. We've still managed to get some people back to work. We're working on job creation initiatives consistent with our manifesto. It's not easy to do that in the middle of a pandemic. Some countries have seen a massive, massive decline. In employment, in income, in everything, and in output, GDP. But we have managed to not only keep our heads above water, but also advance the country's economic interests. And this is with sniping all the time, etc. So it's not very helpful for people out there where you have a receptive government. I know President Ali would be willing to sit down and share all the technical details, but people sometimes are not prepared to get the technical details. They don't want it because that takes away their ability to go to the newspapers.
part of rebooting the economy that you speak about has involved a lot of cash transfers. How long do you see that continuing? And are you thinking of new areas in which you can do that?
Yeah, well, rebooting the economy is a combination of what? A lower tax environment, which we have done. So the measures that we put in place in the first two budgets, if you annualize the benefits, it would be equivalent to over $40 billion remaining with the private sector or people, ordinary people, as disposable income. So if you have to pay, you don't have to pay VAT on electricity, you then have more income in your pocket. So that was one aspect of rebooting the economy. Secondly, they're giving some cash transfers, but those were also consistent with our promises. So you increase disposable income to people and they can spend more. Thirdly, it meant working on projects with a shorter gestation period that can generate immediate employment. So that is why we've been pushing aggressively the public sector investment program, the smaller projects that have created like thousands of jobs, getting contracts going, etc. The housing sector has absorbed a fairly large amount of people who have, in construction industry, we're rebooting that. And we're at a stage where we're even running out of material like sandstone, cement, that sort of thing. So this is an important part, working on multiple fronts to reboot the economy in the short term, whilst we are laying in the longer term projects, programs, and plans to deliver over the next 5 years. So a lot of that technical work is being done. The feasibility studies, coming back to those, have been all done for the East Coast Highway, the East Bank Highway, the West Coast Highway, because those are part of the infrastructure for the future. We're working on the energy transition, infrastructure for the future, the big things that will deliver on the social sector promises that we made.
So, right, I want to touch about the oil funds now, the money that is coming in from oil. There has been a rather ad hoc way of marketing it for the longest while. I see bids have been open for a crude market. Do you think that you'll finally decide on someone? India is very interested in buying all of Ghana's share of the oil.
So India is interested. They submitted a bid, and they were the best bid in the last shipment, and it was successfully concluded. However, we don't want to be doing this on the short term. The initial bid we had about 30 persons. The evaluators didn't pre-qualify about 27 of them, although these are major companies. So we've just gone out. The evaluation is being done, and we expect that we told India, if you want to also secure the contract, you also have to bid. And so
so you're not interested in a bilateral arrangement?
No, because if we do bilateral, we'd always have the accusation. APNU, in this racist mode that they're in, they always believe that if you do anything with India, it's you're doing it because of race, etc. Well, our relationship with India and at the government-to-government level has always been a friendly country. But on the economic side, we observe the principles of getting the best deal for Guyana. So India, we told them they would have to put in a bid along with all the companies. And I'm hoping that within a matter of weeks, a decision would be made that will settle who sells our oil for the next maybe year, at least 1 year contract. And that would be settled shortly.
And so you have hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in the fund in New York. Your government has said that you're not going to touch it unless systems are in place. What minimum systems would you say you're looking for to start spending the money?
Yeah, so there are a few things. I think the president, in answering questions from the reporters just a few days ago, pointed out that we are putting in place systems for the management of the sector. So these include the Petroleum Commission, a reform of the legislation that set up the Natural Resources Fund, etc. And then on the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Natural Resources Fund, the money that is there, we decided that we will come up with a program. That program for spending will have to go through a parliamentary process. So right now we've accumulated the money. Everybody knows how much we're accumulating. Anytime we utilize funds from that pool of resources, they will have to go through a transparent process. And the process will be publicly identifying the project, saying how much money will be utilized from the fund for that project, ensuring that the Auditor General is also aware of how the process is involved. It would require parliamentary approval. We'll go through the parliamentary process where the project can be scrutinized, all the questions asked, and then implemented. So a lot of people believe that we should save all of the money now. But the president pointed out we had to have a balance, that we cannot have poor people who don't have access to water and electricity and basic minimum, and not address those concerns whilst we're saving for intergenerational equity. Now, our idea is that in the latter year, by 2026 or so, 2025, 2026, you're going to have a steep ramp up of how much money will come to us. Because now we get a few $100 million a year, which compared to the budget is not a large sum of money. It took us nearly 2 years to accumulate $450 million. So at that stage, you have to then say, we're beyond a de minimis level. We have to look at what share we'll save for the future. But right now, based on what we have to utilize those funds to build the conditions for non-oil, a progressive, prosperous non-oil economy, so that when the oil disappears, we still have a booming economy with jobs for all of our people, unlike many of those countries that utilize all the money not for the oil and gas sector or for welfare, and didn't build the fundamentals of a non-oil economy, so that when the oil and gas resources became depleted, they've run into serious trouble. Look at Trinidad and Tobago, what they're having now, economic meltdown, because they didn't have the foresight to do that, to invest in the non-oil and gas sector. And so many countries have suffered this. It's called the Dutch disease. So that is what we are examining carefully. There's been no rush to utilize the funds. Every cent that we've given out in flood relief, or the cash grant, or the children's resources, the 15,000 and the 4,000 to the kids, that has come from the core budget, not from oil funds, because that was our commitment. So you're going to see a program laid out for the utilization of the funds. It will be transparently done. But when we spoke about the system, we meant outlining how the public can scrutinize the use of the funds and the system for managing the sector.
So do you have priority areas in mind?
Infrastructure and social upliftment. We made it clear education is a top priority. And the scholarship program we have laid out, that's funded now from the core budget, not from oil funds, the 20,000 scholarships that we plan to do. But we laid out an agenda for education reform. We want a world-class education system in Guyana. We want a greater share of our population having tertiary education. That's why the big non-UG type of intervention in providing tertiary care through the scholarship program. So supporting the University of Guyana to expand and to grow, and at some stage having free university education, because we promised that too. We said in the latter years of our first term in office, this is after we return to democracy here in 2020, that we will approach it like that. So right now we're laying out the fundamentals for greater tertiary education delivery, curricular reform, and a new mode of delivering education in this post-pandemic era using virtual means. And that would see massive investments in ensuring that we are at the cutting edge of this for our children. So that's on the education side. That's one area that we see as priority for spending. On healthcare, we made a commitment that a children's hospital, maternal children's hospital of the highest level, like the care that you can receive anywhere in the world, is a top priority. We have projects now through the Indian government and through through British project to upgrade regional hospitals, where we're going to be stimulating private sector investment in tertiary care. But massive investments. We have programmed some money from the Inter-American Development Bank for massive investments in healthcare too. So health sector upgrading is an enormous priority of ours. We inherited a devastating situation. When we thought at the bond, they told us we have enough drugs. And every week when we went out, the people were saying, this is 6 months into the government. They say we have shortages in the region. And when we did the audit, they found that more than $10 billion, or 50% of the drugs in the bond, were expired because of the procurement policies of the last government. We cleaned those out. I'm told now we're about 80% there nearly. And hopefully by October, we're back at 100% with all the listed drugs available. And we're now working on an improved system for distribution of those drugs. Facilities, distribution, management, and personnel. And so massive, we're losing nurses, a lot of the doctors we trained, we've lost, we're working back to that. So some investment from the Sovereign Wealth Fund for in healthcare will be important for us. And then on the infrastructure projects or assistance to the other sectors of the economy so that they can then continue to generate jobs, the labor-intensive areas of our economy, so that we can see prosperity, because we've already recognized that the oil and gas sector, it's not a labor-intensive sector. It is capital-intensive. So those are some of the areas we identified for use of the resources under the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And they can be used without changing the dynamics of the economy. That is fundamental change in real prices. That is with the Dutch disease, changing the real value of the exchange rate, which is something we are looking at carefully, because if that changes, then that could affect all of the other sectors of the economy by making us less globally competitive.
Well, are you supportive of using some of those funds for cash transfers in the hands of people? Outside of what the kind of education cash grant and so on?
This is, yes, if it is necessary and if it's targeted. We are not about giving free money. I see some people saying, like Mr. Lal says, that we should stop working. We have enough money now. It's unbelievable that in many quarters you still have people who have looked at, who have those opinions because they have not studied the numbers. We do not have a great deal of money to give out to everyone. And we don't believe that it should be given out in a way that doesn't support a particular objective. So if we want our children to benefit more, we want them to go to school, to have a more comfortable environment, I'm in favor of children. Elderly, we made it clear that we want to double the pension, old age pension. We started off the first year with a 25% increase. And we said, in 5 years, we want to double old age pension because we believe that they deserve it. And, to live a more comfortable life in old age. If we have to support, single parent and with an objective of them being able to earn and sending the kids to school, I'm in favor of that. Supporting small entrepreneur development. So we have more people getting into business, etc., the small entrepreneurs. These are targeted areas. We made it clear, cash transfer for targeted purposes. We don't have a problem with that, even from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, because it solves a problem, it helps to improve our people's welfare, and it creates more economic dynamism.
Do you see a portion of that Sovereign Wealth Fund going towards cultural industries and sport?
Sport is important for our people. We started off a program where, when I was president, we started building facilities. So the aquatic center, the track, we didn't have anything of the sort. The public squash courts, the stadium. We had a plan for a velodrome. And a lot of these things got cut short. And so better facilities, training, coaching, etc., are important to our country. I don't have personally an objection to this. There are a few people who believe we must not use the funding for sport, but if it can help to improve the standards of our people. Things are dynamically linked. One, not just standards. Sport is a great unifier of our people, bringing our people together. That's a great task ahead of us, because with the opposition speaking about racism all the time, that's their only campaigning tool. That would be so important, ensuring our people at the people-to-people level can interact more with each other. But secondly, sport has also an impact on so many other areas. Healthier population. Now, a lot of our people suffer from lifestyle diseases, the chronic diseases, hypertension, diabetes, which have an enormous cost to the treasury because of later interventions. These are preventable diseases. If you have more people doing sport or in sports program, you can also tackle those issues at the very beginning by having a preventable sort of diseases. But that's a progression to those. I don't see a problem spending back on our people in that regard, but it has to be carefully managed too, because sometimes people think they have the money and they throw it because it's there, it's oil money, you can throw it loosely at every sector. If it supports a national purpose and it brings benefits to our people, I'm sure that our government will look at it and consider it as a source of funding for those projects. But it must have that goal and output benefits to our people.
Can I go back to the elections and what happened since December 21st, 2018, if I have the details right? You set about to remove the APNI government in less than 3.5 years of them being in power. You rose, if I could use that word, as the leader of the PPP. Did it really upset you a lot when you lost government?
There are lots of speculation as to what happened in 2015. Some people believed in the party that we were cheated, that given what happened,
I mean, like a bingo, yeah.
Right, with the Mingo situation, there was evidence that some of that took place in 2015, where like when we requested a recount in Region 4, what happened is we were told that you put in a request too early and that the declaration had not been made at Region 4's level as yet. When the declaration is made, only then you can request a recount. When the declaration was made in Region 4 in 2015, and we sought to put in our request for a recount, the RO at that time disappeared, and we never got our request for a recount in.
Well, you didn't kick up a fuss.
No, yes.
Publicly, at least.
Right, yes. We mentioned it. But at that time, the entire community, the international community, said APNU won, and you didn't see us going to protests or trying to raise people to destroy property and harm people's personal lives. And the same thing happened in Region 8. We lost the MP by a single vote there, and we requested a recount, and we did not get it. But so there was this feeling in the party that we'd been cheated out of government. And that somehow there was some feeling too that maybe the international community played a role in it because they didn't call for the recount to be done. But we had to move beyond that. We could have lived with that rhetoric all the time and, be pathetic and look for sympathy, but that was not going to get us back into government. So we made a very early decision that we had to talk to people around the country as to why we lost, excluding the bit about the possibility of it being rigged. And we believed we lost support for a number of reasons. And I went to the ground. I had nearly 100 meetings across the base, the party base, to explain to people what happened. And so some of the reasons were, and that I explained to them, were we had been in government for a long time. I think we had lost some of the early fire in our bellies that we had. People had grown complacent. We were taking things for granted. In many ways, the party had lost touch too with our base. We didn't service people the way we were doing in the early days, as we should. A lot of people grew arrogant, some in leadership at various levels of government, NDC level, regional level, in the central government. We had been losing the PR battle because we were doing a lot, but we allowed the entire perception to be painted by the government, by the media and by the other side, that we are totally corrupt. So all the projects that were supposed to bring people to us and bring benefits to people were painted as corrupt. The Marriott project, the airport project, the Hope Canal, the Berbice Bridge were all seen as projects for cronies, etc., friends and family. And, even in the Kite Show News, they had a narrative until recently that I own the Marriott. And all of these things were talked about, not just they became so prevailing in the public domain that even ordinary people from our base will believe some of this. And so there were lots of those reasons that caused us to lose support. And so we had to say, okay, we lost the elections. We lost the elections. How are we going to rebuild? I personally did not want to come back. I did not want to get back into politics because I had started to build a career which I wanted to do because it had a lot of discovery in it.
Which is
I had grown a bit tired with the government in the sense by 2011 that it's predictable. I know what to do in every circumstance because I had the experience, been there a long time. So there was no newness for me, and I like discovery. I like newness. I like to be every morning to wake up and want to do something fresh. So government didn't offer that opportunity of newness anymore. We were performing well. We were doing well as an economy. People were making money and stuff like. In that period, 2011, we were booming, jobs, income, etc. So when I left, I started internationally on a pro bono basis to do a lot of work on the environment. And then it became very lucrative too. It was a very lucrative period for me, very, very lucrative. And so it was a combination of social plus also that. But there were discoveries, rediscovering countries. Like I traveled to Africa, spent 2 months, 16 countries, traveling around, traveling to Southeast Asia and stuff like that in those 3 years. But knowing that what APNU was doing, they were coming to dismantle a lot of things. In the first few months, you saw what happened. They took a salary increase for themselves, etc. And then a lot in the party leadership asked me to come back. And then I saw the base too. There are a lot of people when we lost, they were inconsolable. People wanted to migrate because they knew of the history of the PNC, the 28 years. And they said, we'll never get back into office because these people will steal elections. They've never changed. So a lot of them came home by me. For the first 2 months, I just had to say to people, no, we can get back in. We can get back in if we work hard. People of this country will see through them. We're enough good people in Guyana to fight that off now. The era has changed. Fight off the excesses of APNU. So hundreds of people giving back hope to that we could get back in. And so when the party leadership asked me to, I got involved back. And recognizing that I had to play a different role now. So I had to cut out the international agenda. And so in the 5 years as leader of the opposition, I traveled maybe about 4 times out of the country. I used to travel 3-4 times a month. And in those 5 years, I just cut it out totally because the work was here, bringing people together, assuring them, etc. And you had good, hard-working people, ordinary people who were prepared to work, enormous activists who although they didn't have much money, but they gave their hearts to the campaign. Leaders in the party, the activists, our presidential candidate was on the ground in a quiet way, in a more subdued way. He was a backbone in many of the struggles that we've had, but in a less public way. And so all of their efforts, it's not a one-person effort. It's the effort of the party, of its activists, its leaders, and many who came to us, including who left APNU and believed that because they had a chance to compare now, that we had a better plan for the country and we were more patriotic, that we believe in all of Guyana rather than just working for one group of people.
But what was it about your leadership style, do you think, that caused them to say, listen, you take charge?
I don't know, but I can rub people the wrong way sometimes. I'm a little abrupt and sometimes, to the point.
That upset some people in the leadership
It does
of the party.
upset some people and a lot of people who don't know me, right? Because if you come to my office, I may not have small talk. Another person may say, so I'd say, oh, can we get on with the business? What are you here for? So I have that person, that side. When I'm socially inclined, it's a different person. But when I'm in a business environment working, and that's why sometimes I become impatient with mediocrity because it's a damage they do to the country. Like sometimes I see people now trying to stop a project that they have nothing about. If you ask them the first 2 basic facts on the project, they don't know.
Who,
but
like who do you mean?
I don't know. Like now, a lot of them in the so-called NGO environment, they raise funds in this regard. I don't want to call too many names now, because I'm supposed to become a milder version of myself. But that sort of thing. But people who know me, they know that that is the style that I will have, because we're here for a period to do all we can for the country. And I don't mind just sitting down and working 15 hours a day without no publicity whatsoever if it is required. If it's required on a project, reading a document, or doing some stuff. Backroom work. A lot of people don't like doing that. They like the glamorous work, going in the media, getting their pictures in, and then they don't realize there is an engine room work. You have to work on the engine room of government all day, fixing the perks, seeing that it goes forward. And that's unglamorous, hard work that is very boring and lonely sometimes. And then they come and try to destroy all of that work. So sometimes abrupt. But the people who are around me know that I believe in output. And so we set ourselves the output of winning back government. And I think they felt that I could have brought some qualities to that leadership. And it was not without its challenge too in the party. There were a few people who believed that I was not suited for the position. So, but the good thing about party democracy is that the majority, prevailed. And so today, maybe those people have a different view. But coming back to the no confidence motion that you mentioned, part of it, after the local government elections, we had to move swiftly. I knew instinctively that APNU will never give up on a no confidence motion, even if it succeeded. They are inherently undemocratic.
So why did you do it?
And yes, and I'm coming to that. Inherently undemocratic. And the leadership had not changed. They still had the old rigging mentality of the past, because many of the leaders, you had not had a generational change in the APNU. It seemed the people who were accustomed to the good life of rigging, the unaccountable way of staying in office, they were back in government. So they would try to steal the elections, much less give up on a vote of a no confidence. So I tried, and I'm going to say some things for the first time. We knew if we succeeded, we had to have some limits. The reason I tabled it so urgently immediately after the local government elections, I was hoping that it would be debated before the budget, the 2018 budget. So I knew if we succeeded before the budget, they would have had up to March of the following year, when the fiscal year, would have ended. And now the fiscal year ends at December 31st, but you can spend up to 3 months thereafter. So that would have been a limiting factor. But they cut the right card, and they had the budget first, passed the budget, and then had the no confidence. So after that, there was no urgency. Remember I said, people were saying, oh, I was a Grinch and I wanted a no confidence motion for Christmas. And I said, well, shift it into the new year, because the urgency was not there anymore. But they were arrogant. They said, no, let's get it out of the way before Christmas, bring it on and stuff like that. So that took place. And then, so the struggle thereafter was one.
But before you go there,
Yes.
I do want to ask you, people really don't believe that you didn't have Charandas in the bag, like you said, that you didn't have no plan to get him to vote for you. And this just happened. People don't believe that.
We were hoping. We had conversations with lots of people in the parliament.
You mean on the other side?
Right, the other side. They were totally dissatisfied. But when I thought we'd actually have a few more voting for us. But then they were enjoying some perks that we didn't see too. So a lot of them, although they maybe voice dissatisfaction in Parliament, like a figure who was always not happy with what was going on there, within the
he may
government.
come and say it differently. Yeah?
Yes, he will say differently because he's been a beneficiary of lots of perks, figure. So he will, of course, defend that and say it's not true. But then the perks seem to have worked with the others. So we were keeping our ears on the ground. Charandas, I believe, was faced with a dilemma. Charandas was one of the mouthpieces of APNU in Berbice, who was speaking regularly on the ground with the sugar workers. And he was telling them that he was repeating what he was told. Ramjatan and Nagamutu stood up at WIM and said, it's a PPP lie that we will close the sugar industry. That is before the elections. In fact, we plan to expand it. And so no doubt he was the conduit for the message to people. And then when they went underground, when they destroyed the lives of 7,000 sugar workers by sending them home without regard for any social impact that we had asked for, and without even wanting to pay them their severance, Charandas, who lived in that community, faced a lot of pressure from the sugar workers. So no doubt he was internalizing all of this. And so we knew that it had a chance of succeeding, and we had to take the gamble. And that was important for us. And I knew also instinctively that we had to do something to unsettle APNU. Because if they had the full 5 years uninterrupted, I think they were figuring out on a way of rigging. And we had to throw them a bit off that schedule. So they were starting with Felix's project he had a project of digitizing births and deaths. And we saw how quickly in the recount period, when they wanted to prove that people were in the country or not, how quickly they got the reports from the GRO and submitted to the police and stuff like that. They had a direct access to people's record there. Then they had Lowenfield and the other rigging cabal in GCOM, who were planning to do the house to house, and we believe they would have taken off 50,000 names or so from the list, which would have been in the party's base, which would have been very hard to get them back on. Then the plan was to get a chair who was sympathetic to them, and so it was a plan that they had intended to roll out. So the success of the no confidence motion threw them off that schedule because they were in a panic mode. They couldn't properly roll out the plan because the government had fallen. And now they were struggling through the courts to remain in office illegally. And there was greater international scrutiny on their actions. So it threw them off that leisure timetable that they had to rig in. So had the no confidence motion not succeeded, the rigging machinery would have been better honed. And so the clumsiness that there was portrayed by Mingo and others, it wouldn't have been that crude. It would have probably been more subtle and more undetectable. And so that's one of the reasons too. We had to get them off the regular schedule.
So, I mean, a lot of things obviously happened in the 5 months after the elections. We saw a lot of it publicly play out. I was wondering what was happening in the background, particularly about the recount order. Was it the president at the time, Brigadier Granger, who decided to sign that recount order against pushback from others in his party? Did you see that? Was that what was happening?
Sure. So the struggle in the entire period, particularly after the the elections, and after the clumsy attempt to steal the elections, I'm not going to deal with the period, in the pre-election period, what our internal thinking was, the thinking. But at some other day, in another time, in another interview, I can talk about what the dynamics were, what was stacked against us, and how we had to strategize to combat these. Like, for example, the massive ramp up in spending. They're spending and financing their campaign with public funds versus a party that had limited funds and had to run a campaign that was more focused and at the same time mitigate the impact of this massive spending. Because they had this spending, they hired about 15,000 people in the public sector in that period. 15,000. So I saw some programs where they say, oh, only 1,000 persons and stuff like that. They hired nearly 15,000 people and added them to the payroll of the government in the period between 2018 to the elections. That is one. Two, they spent the 419.5 billion. That's about $2 billion without accounting for it or without parliamentary oversight. Three, they paid for their consultancies through projects. For example, Alston Short, who is the advisor to the APNU AFC campaign. We recently came out that they awarded a contract to him for, I think it's about 300,000 US to bring in scales into Ghana. The scales never arrive. That's a major investigation we have now with Patterson and others awarding that contract. The scales never arrived, but that was their consultant. Next, they were using all of the money to fly into the hinterland to buy the election stuff, including the Department of Energy, etc., awarding contracts to people who were buying all their election material. Then they had all of the hinterland radio stations, etc., carrying out propaganda. So it was a major environment stacked against us. And then also they had the benefit of incumbency. Incumbency often adds a percentage or 2 percentage points to your well-being at election time. So all of those were stacked against us, and we had to try to run a campaign to address all of those. So election happened. We won the elections. And then we were faced with this situation. So we had to have.
When did you know you won the elections?
What happened is that the next day, all night I was working with the numbers. The guy said I shut myself in at my office at Freedom House. Said just the numbers coming in, nobody could come in. And by morning, 8 o'clock the next morning, we knew because we had gotten into all of our SOPs. And I said almost immediately, including before the fiasco at GCOM, I said to the guys, prepare a website. And we're going to upload all of our SOPs because we didn't trust APNU. So we start preparing a website to upload our SOPs, which the country saw the next few days, the 2 days thereafter. And on the majority, we didn't have every single one, but maybe 98% went up. And that was very helpful because until now, they have not released their SOPs. And the thing is that they're so shamelessly saying they won the elections. Now they have some programs. And even Lowenfield SOPs that he gave to the court, the Chief Justice for well-being, proved that we won the elections. The same one that Mingo would have made his assessment on. So imagine that will prove the fraud that Mingo, that they were fabricated SOPs that he used. So Lowenfield's submission to the Chief Justice proved the PPP won the elections. So that same day, and so the following morning, they had already started saying they won the elections. I think they knew too they knew that they lost the elections. So they started going on a PR offensive to mislead their base. Now, we had promised the international community to not to make a declaration until the official declaration is made. But we had to find a way, to say to their supporters that we won, and to our base that we also won the elections, because there was panic in the base. So I said to the guys, let's go for coffee. And we went and we had coffee, Irfan, myself, and a few of the other leaders, and we posted an image.
That was Tuesday.
Yes, that was sometime the Tuesday. And that image said to the whole country that PPP, there was nothing we were worried about. That the image alone changed the dynamics in our base, and it caused them panic too. It caused them panic. So because we had to, people saw our faces, they knew. We didn't have to say a word. And so that was just communicating without declaring. And because there was a lot of concerns in the country. And so we had, in the period thereafter, we had to have a multi-pronged approach, because when they realized that, they rolled out a whole range of campaigns to mislead the public, particularly their base. So when people think we had a legal part of our campaign, and that someday we can talk about the thinking behind the legal issues, right? The thinking behind the legal issues, because there are lots of tactical decisions we had to make at different point in time. But the legal part was one part of a multi-pronged approach. So we had to strategically address the legal issues that were coming very swiftly. And I must confess, we had a great team, Mendez, Anil, a large number of Guyanese lawyers that I can't really mention all their names, for which we are extremely grateful. And the second part was the international community, making sure they were getting the information, showing them our SOPs, keeping them informed. The third part was making sure that our base was not so anxious. There were jitters and people were angry, really angry. And some wanted to take drastic action that could have, like people on the ground, that could have derailed our approach. So I had to constantly talk to them, the leaders, bring them in, talk to them, say, no, our approach has to be a different one. Can't fall into their plan. They would like to see turmoil in the country, and they would provoke you into turmoil. Then another part of the multi-pronged approach was to ensure that AppNews base too was getting a different narrative, because they were hearing all the time from these leaders that, oh, we were rigging, and they're changing narrative about how they're rigging and they won the election. So we had to try to get as much information to the AppNews supporters to say to people that they were there. So there were lots of moving parts at the same time, trying to keep things going. And of course, trying to get the recount, because we knew the international community was prepared to say the elections were rigged. But they were not prepared to say at that point in time the PPP won the elections, because they knew the rigging, but they had not looked at the SOPs, the real SOPs as yet. So they think it was crucial to get a recount, because without a recount, you would have had probably, their argument was a declaration based on the old figures, or alternately, they wanted fresh elections or power sharing they were talking about, right? Because they knew they had lost. So the international community, everyone wanted a recount. Everyone from CARICOM, etc., to all of us wanted this recount. It could have proven definitively who won the elections. So that was crucial. When the CARICOM team came here, we met the night, and they're saying, well, let's move forward on a recount. And President Granger was told by his handlers at that time, Trotman and Harman were the handlers, and I'm sure they didn't want the recount. I'm almost sure, their body language, everything. So when the discussion surrounding the recount took place, President Granger said, you know, you're concerned about Region 4, but I have concerns about Region 6, Region 5, and 3. And he said, in Region 3, there is a RO whose name is Jagdeo, right? The RO name, of course, I never met the man. I don't know him, but implying basically somehow I had something to do with this. So I said to the leaders at that time, we will agree to a national recount if that's your concern, because we can address your concerns too. Let's go and check all the boxes now, because we knew the PPP had done nothing wrong, and we knew that the SOPs, they were a reflection of the process that took place in the polling stations that had been scrutinized. So we didn't have any concerns. We had concerns about tampering afterwards with the boxes. And so, but we were looking at those boxes even from election day, even before the event took place at GCOM.
What do you mean looking? Securing
the containers,
making sure that they
were not tampered with, because we were not taking any chances. This was a PNC that had been schooled in rigging elections, so I could not take any chance with them. So we knew up to at that point in time there was no tampering with the boxes. And so we said, so we didn't have an issue with that. So we said this is so. Now, a lot of people in the NGO community, and including in the party, they were not very happy that I agreed to a national recount. They said, why do you agree to a national recount when the problem is only in Region 4? But they didn't know the context in which we were trying to get a recount. Because to get a recount, you had to move to a national recount to address their concerns too. And obviously he was told that somehow we had tampered, President Granger. So the process thereafter was a really tough process. I had no doubt that when President Granger went back, the leadership in APNU tried to stop the recount from going forward. And that is why they challenged it in court. They challenged the recount in court, although they had agreed to the recount. They got one of their surrogates to challenge the recount. So Roysdale Ford and Trotman and Harman and the others did not want the recount to take place because they were part, I believe, of the rigging machinery. So they knew the recount would really prove that they actually did not win the elections. And I believe Granger is an aloof sort of leader. And I don't think he gets into details. He's not detail-minded. So no, and he lives off of what people tell him, though, especially in his closest circle. So what he does, he would listen to them, and no doubt they said, oh, Chief, we won the elections, and, they're stealing the elections in Region 3 and Region 5. So he bought that, he sold it. So the process to get him to sign on to the order was another behind-the-scenes nightmare that I will not deal with at this point in time. But they tried to actively sabotage that, even after the court had cleared the way forward. And so throughout this process, they were trying to sabotage it. And we discovered, after we got into office, that President Granger may not have trusted the leadership of APNU, that they were giving him in the latter stages when he started to realize that all of this information that was coming may have some veracity. The information from the international community, from the SOPs, from civil society, from the media. And maybe, no doubt, few people were talking to him because he got the security forces to tap the phone of Harman, Trotman, and Valder Lawrence. And so he was listening to their conversations in that period. This was in the latter period as we approach the conclusion of the recount. So there was clearly, you had camps in there that were in a struggle to rig the elections. They were unrepentant riggers like Harman and Roysdale Ford and Trotman and a few others. And they were unrepentant riggers. They did not mind, and I believe Nagamotu and Ramjatan too, and Kati Hughes. I'm not calling all of them, but these are some of the most vocal ones. They didn't mind the international sanctions because that would have destroyed the country. They didn't mind, they were so afraid that their corruption would have been exposed because they all have things that they are worried about. The fact that we didn't move forward as yet on the investigations is not a fact that we will not do so. We just focus on priority areas of moving the country forward. But they were mortally afraid of that. Secondly, they didn't want to lose the perks of office. So they didn't mind putting the country at risk. They were scared. And so they were panicked and scared. So they would have hung on at every cost. They would have been there. And therefore, they were misleading. They knew they lost the elections. And you had a major fallout in their camp about the riggers and people who are more afraid of what the sanctions will bring to them personally and to the country. And I think that's when the sanction talk and everything else also caused President Granger to sit up and say, we have to look at this carefully. So it was this, they knew they were rigging. All this talk is bravado, and they continue to mislead the people of this country. So there were hundreds of behind the scenes things that were going on, including at a recount that I can't tell you now. Maybe in another 20 years or so, I'll talk about it. But there were direct attempts to rig the elections, to stop the process, to intervene, to tamper with, that we had to fight off at every moment. We practically didn't sleep a month, 24 hours a day. From watching boxes, we had large numbers of people who showed up. Day and night, they were out there, people who gave 100% to the recount, people from all walks of life, people who never supported us. And the fact that we succeeded is a testimony to the good people of this country, those even who voted APNU, because you had good, decent people who voted APNU but were not prepared to have our country become a pariah state again, and to have this pure wickedness, unadulterated wickedness succeed. And the testimony, you have some heroes in the also the judiciary and other parts of the country who stood up. Starting with Bartland Scotland. Bartland Scotland had been appointed by APNU, but he stood up as a patriotic, decent Guyanese, and he said, no, I'm not going to try to overturn that no confidence motion. And the Chief Justice and many other judges of great stature and integrity. And there are some judges who were horribly flawed too in their decisions, but they will go down in infamy. But there were many with integrity in our judiciary and at the CCJ. The CCJ is not a PPP court. when I took Guyana back into the CCJ, because we needed that external review. A lot of people criticized me, including from Trinidad and Tobago, said it's an Afro-Caribbean court. And I said, no, we needed a external review, people, decent judges from around the world. And they showed that these are decent judges who made, with integrity, made a decision.
Were there moments when you thought it was not going to happen, that this was not going to succeed?
I never really had any doubt. We were working very hard. I didn't allow doubt to creep in. If I had allowed doubt to creep in my body language and just what I say, people would have picked up on it, the people who were around me. And so I never allowed that thought to get into my head, maybe in my quiet moments, but never once in my activities or what I said to people. We had this to succeed. We had to succeed not just for the PPP, but we had to succeed for the country.
And so you're back in politics for the long haul. Final question.
Yes. At this point in time, yes. I still have another task to do, that is, as the government gets going, to try to recruit new young leaders into the party leadership at Freedom House, because we're a bit depleted there, and to train them, incubate them, expose them, so that that's the next wave of leadership in the future. I have the party to rebuild, to make sure that we remain accountable to people, we remain with our heads on the ground, and to talk to the president to ensure that every single day that the ministers don't, we have seen some cases already, the president has spoken to the cabinet, that they don't become anywhere whatsoever arrogant or anything akin to what we witnessed in the last 5 years, that they remain focused on their programs and on people and their welfare. And so, for those reasons, yes, and to see that the party grows, that the party includes more people, that our party looks like Guyana, more Afro-Guyanese come into the party, these are tasks that I set myself. And so I'm going to work on those issues.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.